Today we don't really think about what file to use when recording audio. We never really have to think about how much we want to spend on a sound card either. It's because digital audio is something we are always used to having and hearing. One such technology is vocoding. You can find vocoding in many things that you use every day, such as the background noise cancellation in programs such as RTX Voice.
Quite annoying, yes.
I'm going to go ahead and turn my noise suppression back on. There.
Wow.
Is that an improvement?
That is such an improvement.
You don't even need to think about how good audio will sound based on your computer's onboard audio equipment. It's all because we're always experimenting with what we can do to make music. The path it took to get to this point was long, but it is interesting to look at, and it all started with vocoding. The research for vocoding started before computers. Bell Labs started the research in 1928. 11 years after the research started, the results were shown at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Bell Labs revealed the first vocoder, or at the time, it went by the name Voder. The demonstration stunned the crowd when the voder started to speak.
Will you have the voter say, "She saw me"? That sounded awfully flat. How about a little expression? Say the sentence in answer to these questions. Who saw you?
The voder was difficult to use as it was hand-operated with 13 different keys. When the presenter was asked if there was going to be any commercial use for the voder, he commented,
Well, Dr. Caldwell, we don't anticipate any commercial use for the voter. It was built for an educational exhibit for the New York World's Fair and San Francisco Exposition.
Little did he know the commercial use would be huge. The demonstration's success led to Bell Labs continuing their research. Instead of music, the vocoder's first commercial use was military message encryption in World War II. In 1943, Bell Labs developed the Sig-Sally system for the U.S. military to encrypt important messages. Before the Sig-Sally system, both sides of the war used what is known as the A3 voice scrambler to encrypt messages. The problem with the A3 voice scrambler was that both sides easily decrypted the message. The Sig-Sally system was a huge success during the war, causing Bell Labs to continue their research. 17 years later, researchers John Kelly and Louis Gersman used an IBM 704 to synthesize speech and sing Daisy Bell.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
This was a huge event in humanity's history. People around the world saw potential in what computers can do with music. Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001: A Space Odyssey, happened to be at Bell Labs during the demonstration. He was so impressed that he had it recorded, and he used it in a climactic scene of the screenplay of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The breakthrough in technology led to the development of the Moog synthesizer, which is widely used in the music industry. Artists from around the world were making vocoders. One of the first ones was made by Bruce Hack, which was called the Farad. Bruce used his vocoder in his music. Two of his first albums to use the technology were The Electronic Record for Children and, on his rock album, The Electric Lucifer. Bruce was not the only artist to use a vocoder in his music. During this time, a British band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer used the vocoder in the song Carnival 9. Michael Jackson was among the first big artists to use vocoding in music. During his song PYT, there are background vocals of Michael Jackson that are vocoded.
Just like you, such a PYT.
This use of vocoding is not easily heard by listeners and might be mistaken for by a synth. The late 70s and early 80s was considered the dawn of the computer era, and computers were becoming more and more accessible to the common man. It was becoming clear that there was a want for good digital audio in the home. Electronic audio was becoming a big way for companies to make money. Texas Instruments saw this opportunity and took it. In 1980, TI released the Speak and Read. The Speak and Read was a children's toy that had 6 games centered around spelling.
Level 1. Select the word rug. Yes, the answer is wrong.
This was not the only speech synthesizer TI made. Around the same time, TI released a speech synthesis module for their TI-99 computer. There are many other speech synthesis add-ons for computers released at the same time. One such synthesizer is the DigiSpeech.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Even though the sound of it is really quite atrocious.
These external speech synthesizers were a common type of physical vocoders that were made for early PCs, but fell out of favor for the much cheaper and easier to use text-to-speech programs. In the early 80s, there was no standardized audio interface for electronic musical instruments. Every company that made electronic musical instruments had their own proprietary way of connecting them all together. The founder of Roland, Ikutaro Kashihashi, did not like this and sought to standardize the digital interfaces for all electronic musical instruments. Kashihashi talked to Sequential Circuits founder Dave Smith about creating a universal audio interface. Later, at the October 1981 Audio Engineering Society show, Dave Smith and Chet Wood, an engineer who worked at Sequential Circuits, proposed a paper laying out the standard for a universal audio interface. After discussion with musical instrument manufacturers Yamaha, Korg, Kawai, and Sequential Circuits, they all agreed on the name MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. MIDI can carry up to 16 channels of info, all of which can be routed to a separate instrument or device. In all the channels, MIDI carries instructions for notes, pitch, notation, velocity, vibrato, left and right panning, and clock signals. Around the time when MIDI was standardized, a new competitive market opened up, the sound card market. Roland was one of the first to make a sound card supporting MIDI. It was called the MPU 401. The MPU 401 was fairly successful, so later, Roland distributed MPU sound chips to manufacturers, which really helped MIDI become very popular and widespread. One of the biggest sound card manufacturers was Creative Lab, who makes the Sound Blaster line of sound cards. Creative Labs had the biggest market share, and thus had the best software compatibility. MIDI had a fairly small file size due to the fact that it was not a recording, but a set of instructions. Because it was a set of instructions instead of a recording, it was largely up to sound cards as to what the actual audio would sound like. Once MIDI became standardized, Apple, Commodore, Atari, IBM, and Microsoft developed software support for the technology, which led to many more people using it. Today, it's easy to find an old electronic musical instrument at a thrift store. But that doesn't stop companies from innovating and making even more great electronic musical instruments. You don't even need a keyboard to make great music on your computer. All the tools are easily accessible right on your computer through software such as MusicCore. Computer-generated audio is just starting out, and there's so much potential in what it can do.